Hello and welcome to the Pacific Center podcast. My name is Dr. Greg Lane and I will be your host as we explore many interesting topics with many amazing people from a variety of professional backgrounds over the months and years ahead. The focus of this podcast will be the intersection of the traditional healthcare practices of various cultures and the modern scientific research on peak physical and cognitive performance. This show will be delivered in an interview format. Quick disclaimer, while we may be discussing some health-related issues and therapies, in no way will this be construed as medical advice. As always, if you're seeking information or treatment for a medical condition, please consult with a licensed healthcare provider. Our guest today is Prana Gogia. Prana is a doctor of acupuncture and oriental medicine, a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist, teacher of Ayurveda and craniosacral work. His passion is to help and educate people in resolving health issues effectively and efficiently. By integrating Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and craniosacral work, he is able to treat different patients with a variety of conditions and provide natural remedies to activate the mind-body's innate ability for healing and longevity. He comes from an engineering background and has a master's in business administration with over 10 years of leadership experience in working with executive teams of national and multinational companies and managing teams in creating and executing system strategies. He was born in India. Prana has spent over 30 years studying and practicing healing work in the lineage of the Siddha tradition. He has traveled extensively to regions of Tibet, Nepal, and India to learn meditative and healing practices. He practices a gentle style of acupuncture integrated with Ayurveda and craniosacral work. He teaches Ayurveda and craniosacral work in schools and workshops. And Prana, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Greg, and hello to everyone who is listening.
So today we're going to be focusing on a branch of Ayurveda called Kayakalpa. And just a little bit of an intro, and then I'll let you take it over here. Kayakalpa is the conjunction of two Sanskrit words, kaya, which refers to the material subtle body of kalpa, which means transformation or rejuvenation. And so why don't you kick us off? Give us a little bit of a history of what Kayakalpa is and Ayurveda, how it relates.
Sure. Let's start with Ayurveda first. Has been there for a long time. To give you just a brief background of time and perspective of all other medicines, at the time of Buddha, which was 500 BC, India had well-known surgeons who did craniotomy, who did glaucoma surgery, skin grafts, prosthetic limbs. We're talking about surgery at that level, which means you have to know anatomy, you have to know physiology, you have to know nutrition, you have to know diet, you have to know how the person is going to go through the cycle of being surgery as well as coming out of it and survive, prognostics and diagnostics, all of it. Mm-hmm. Then only we can say that they were surgeons. And even if you look today, if you look up Google and say who is the first surgeon documented on the planet Earth in current modern history, it will be Sushruta, who is the Ayurvedic surgeon I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. So in 500 BC, at the time when Buddha was present, medicine was that advanced, which means it was much older. How old? The doctor was that advanced, which means it was much older. How old? The documented history points to about 1200 BC, but the oral tradition goes much older. Mm-hmm. And Ayurveda is two words, Ayush, which means life or longevity, and Ved is wisdom. So it's a wisdom of longevity and life. Mm-hmm. How did it came together? The documents, the root text we call the foundation text of Ayurveda, it says that there was a conference of sages. In other words, before we became urban society, people were still on the planet, but they lived in not owning things. They lived, we call them forest dwellers.
Tribal,
not even tribal. Tribes came much after. These are the people who lived in family, wandered around, but they never stayed together as you are mine and this is like that. And they had families, but they were forest dwellers. They never said this is my way themselves by what they possess. About 3,500 BC, these conference people said that there was a change. People became tribal. People became to settle down. Instead of being forest dwellers, they're starting to have urbanization. They're starting to come together and say, why I have to do alone all of these? I should share stream, and then we should all together grow food and share food like that. It saves time. It creates community. So that was the time then sages came together and says, people's way of awareness has shifted. In other words, there was a big shift in a whole that part of the world that no longer describes themselves, identify themselves with their body and mind and senses and spirit, but rather what they possessed. And that said that this is going to create many diseases, and they will need a medicine because. And that said that this is going to create many diseases, and they will need a medicine because why? As soon as they have started defining themselves by what they own and possess, their longevity is going to shrink.
Interesting.
And we're talking about 3000 BC that they thought that this is going to happen.
Right.
And we can see it today. I mean, as people start to more get engaged in outer world, possessions and owners and hoardings and obsessions, we have seen those people start to get very fast, internally unhealthy. And these are talking about 3,500 BC. It's almost like 5,500 years ago. They said they realized, and that's why these all came together. And that was the conference in which the principles of Ayurveda, and you can actually read the conference summary, it's still there. And Dhanvantari was, we call him Lord Dhanvantari, who you have seen probably his pictures. He's holding a nectar of a vessel in his one hand and a leech on another hand, because bloodletting is big in Ayurveda. And he kind of went through conferences and settled down the discussions and doubts, and debates, and came up with what we call today Ayurveda. That became the root text. It has 8 branches. And from the day one of that conference, it has always been 8 branches. And that's why some of the root texts call the 8, the heart of 8, which is basically Ayurveda. One of the branch is Rasayana, out of those 8 branches. And the other branches are things that we also see now in biomedicine, like the internal medicine, psychiatry, surgery, ENT, all of those are branches. There is a branch called Vajikaran, which literally means taking care of yourself from a perspective of sensuality and able to generate your progeny and the health of progeny. It's hard to translate that one word. We call today fertility, but we don't call in Ayurveda as fertility because we are not something that grows up in a field that is fertile and then you suddenly pop up.
Right.
Fertility because we are not something that grows up in a field that is fertile and then you suddenly pop up.
Right.
It's a lot more goes on internally. But before that is a branch called Rasayana, which means rejuvenation and prevention. And it's the part that is not yet in most medicines. And it's one of the big branch which says that if you don't prevent yourself from the direction you're going, which may lead you to unhealthy, then your life will start to decrease. And by the time you realize, it may be too late. Like we have heard in Chinese medicine, you talk about you shouldn't dig up the well when you're thirsty.
Right.
It's too late by the time.
It's the tradition of nourishing
Correct.
life, or yang shen.
Yeah, and even in governance, we say that don't wait for state to become unhealthy. You should start moving things around before the signs of unhealthiness happen in a state. Same thing with body, and that's what they said, that this is the branch that is the most, that he had a very stubborn daughter, and she was the only child, and she didn't want to marry anybody because she didn't like anybody. So king kind of made a decree that we're going to blindfold her and let her walk through the kingdom. Whoever she touches first, that will be her husband. Because she's not ready to agree on anybody, so he's just going to take a chance with her.
Right.
And it happened that as she was walking out the door of palace, the person who used to bring herbs and medicines from the local teacher of a herbalist, she touched him. And he was an old guy. He was not in his 20s. He was more in his 40s or mid-50s, like that, late age. And now people were in like, what do we do now? So he went back to his teacher, who was the master herbalist and Ayurvedic practitioner. He said, give me 90 days. So within 90 days, he rearranged his internal and what he originally was, slightly less. So instead of 50, he probably looked about 30, but internal vigor and external vigor, almost like he was at 25. And then they got married. So that process is called Kayakalpa. It's not exactly anti-aging. Most people think it's anti-aging, that's how it's translated, but it's more alchemical. So in other words, we use the same herbs, same practices that are used in Delhi Ayurveda, same principles. It's not outside Ayurveda. It is still part of Ayurveda, and it's specifically part of Rasayana, which is prevention, but in a very different way. So it's not like we're doing completely different, like in Chinese medicine, we talk about history of emperor that he went to find some immortal things and try to be immortal. It's not that. It's very much into Ayurveda. It's part of Ayurveda, but it requires practitioners' understanding of deeper, and person has to be with them as he goes through changing himself. Understanding of deeper, and person has to be with them as he goes through changing himself. So it's not like you can go live in the home. So he literally had to live with him for 90 days, follow the regimen. The practitioner was looking after him, giving herbs, changing things, and it's both. There is manual therapies, internal therapies, diet, meditative, all of it together. So it's not one aspect of Ayurveda that is, we can say, okay, this is Kayakalpa that you can extract and say, okay, only if you do this, it will reverse. All of this, why? Why Ayurveda was saying that the life is going to shorten and we should worry about, why are they worried about longevity? It's two aspects. One, you have to understand, is the Ayurveda comes from the South Asian philosophies, which to a certain extent influenced Eastern as well, East Asian as well, which we call the Dharma tradition. Some call Sanatan Dharma, some call Vedic Dharma, some call Buddhist Dharma, but Dharma you'll find as the common word across all is not, or nature of reality, is not substantial. In other words, we are not substances. It's a process or force-based ontology, that we are not things. We are processes, we are forces that are coming together and make us feel who we are as an individual, as a person. And the whole focus is that as you go through life, you discover really who you are. And that discovery, when it reaches to the highest level, we call that as a peak experience. That we call nirvana in Buddhist world, or moksha in dharmic world. The whole focus is to have that peak experience in your life. But in order to get to that peak experience, sages said that you have to mature. Your mind has to mature, your body has to mature, your awareness has to mature to be able to create. In other words, they say you can't, your awareness has to mature to be able to create. In other words, they say you can't transform yourself to higher level. You only make yourself, enable yourself to have the higher level of awareness come down to you. It's a different way of thinking.
You become a channel.
Correct. It's become a vessel rather than a channel.
Yeah.
That you open up, you clean up, you become soft, you mature yourself, you mold yourself, that you're ready to have that experience. And that's what the longevity comes in place. Is that you have to go through being a child, you have to go through being a responsible adult, you learn to live in the society, you create your own family, you go through all that to see what attachment means, what pain means, what suffering means, that there is something in you that is experiencing all this, but it can experience much more. And that's what they were focused upon. And that was the reason the definition of Ayurveda does not include diseases. And that's why until 2000 or early 2000, World Health Organization didn't recognize Ayurveda as a world medicine, because the definition says it's about how to be living appropriately, inappropriately, happy and sorrowful condition of life, auspicious and inauspicious for life and longevity. That's what Ayurveda is. And the Kayakalpa's focus is to help somebody who has reached a certain level of maturity to further their vessel in that way, to be able to have a peak experience.
So with Ayurveda, you have to go through certain levels before you start embarking upon the Kayakalpa level? You have to go through the certain 8 levels to get to the Kayakalpa level then?
No, the Kayakalpa level can be done anytime. So most often practitioners use Kayakalpa in their daily meditation, in their daily practice, in their daily regimen, or even treatment of the people. Principles are same. But in order to kind of do it in a concentrated way, like the story of that old man, it requires regimen or even treatment of the people. Principles are same. But in order to kind of do it in a concentrated way, like the story of that old man, it requires that you kind of separate from society for a while, 90 days to 120 days, depending upon who you are. In those days, 3 months was the main. It's no different than how Buddhists take retreat. Say, okay, I'm going to live for a year and then separate myself from the society, go inward, do all this kind of health cleaning, cleaning subtle body to have that inner experience. We call in Buddhist 3 years, 3 months retreat. Kayakalpa does focus purely on physical and subtle to prepare you for the peak. It doesn't go into spiritual side.
So people that are that are doing Kayakalpa are retreating for a period of time.
Could be 7 days, could be 14 days, could be 3 months, like that.
So there's no prescription per se. For me, if you were treating me, if you were Muslims, and you would design the Kayakalpa retreat specifically for me.
Exactly.
I got it. Okay.
So you look at your constitution, which is what Ayurveda's main theory is about constitution. You may have heard Vata, Pitta, Kapha.
Right.
What Ayurveda, as I said, it's based on ontology of processes, not ontology of things. So it's not looking for a substance. We're not going to modify anything that is called substance in you. It says that the world or all of creation, multi-world or whichever you think, is formulated or interviewed by 5 main forces. We call Mahabhutas. Bhutas are living conscious forces, and Maha means great. And those most often get translated in English as earth, water, fire, air, and space. But they're English translation. When it comes down to actually looking at the Sanskrit words, they don't actually exactly mean that way. What we call earth is more like a force of gravity. Whole earth that you stand upon, it's really more of what gives you boundary of your physical, holds things inside, transfers things inside from insubstantial to substantial. And that is what, as a metaphorically, if you were to think, what is earth without gravity? Nothing. All the substance will go away, air will be gone, it will just become vacuum. What holds everything together, it gives, even if you think as the earth, as a planet, has multiple layers. We have the whole body of environment we call air and moisture that is going around at high speed. Is it literally part of the earth? Probably yes or no, but all depends upon how you see. If the gravity is gone, everything is gone. So what holds that together? It's called gravity. We call that in Sanskrit as, which is translated in English as earth. And then is solvency. Things dissolving into each other so that something else can get created. Which often, water being the biggest solvent, we kind of synonymize it English as earth. And then is solvency. Things dissolving into each other so that something else can get created. Which often, water being the biggest solvent, we kind of synonymize it as a water. But what it really is solvency. Fluidity that will dissolve things, that substances no longer have their boundaries. They start to dissolve and become like one fluid thing. And that we call water. All the plasmas and blood and everything has a fluid. Bones have earth. Muscles, fat have earth. We have structure through that. And then comes down to when the water starts to transform, it requires heat. And that's a transformation. So anything that is transformed in the world, in galaxy, in the human body, requires some kind of heat. Tejas, we say. Even to digest words to transform into meaning, you need that warmth. If that warmth is not there, you're completely tired, you have no energy, you can sit in front of a more teacher, nothing will transform in your head. I mean, the words will pass through you straight. That's why we say that you don't have that light, you don't have that heat. That's we call the third element. In English, we call it fire. Anything that moves, wind moves, tectonic plates move, clouds move, oceans move, rise and fall, same thing in our body. Blood moves, heart moves, we blink, peristalsis happens, we eat, we talk, thoughts move. Anything that neuron fires, there is a movement. Neurotransmitters move across the boundaries. Any movement requires something that is guiding them to move. And that force we call air. or wind. Very synonymous to in Chinese medicine as qi.
The 5 elements.
And also qi.
Yeah.
These are phases of same one force. So although there are 5, but on the background of all of it is the 5th one, which we in nowadays you can metaphorize as dark energy, even energy that you can't touch, you can't measure. No instruments are able to reach to that level. Same thing Vedic talks about, that beyond all this there is something that is undescribable. It's highly conscious. That's the only difference. We don't consider dark energy as highly conscious and highly intelligent, but Vedic
not
dharma,
yet.
not yet.
Yeah.
But the Dharma says that aspect is highly conscious, highly intelligent, that our mind that have small boundaries can't penetrate it. We don't have instruments to touch it, and that we call space or akash. And from these, all these forces come arise and create shapes and forms that we have today. When these sages start to see that, they said, how do you diagnose person with 5 elements? It's almost impossible. Because every aspect of, if you take a cell, it has a boundary that is earth. It has metabolism happen inside, there is fire. There is movement that happens in and out, and senses and touches, that is all air. And it has a space that occupies. So every part of the body space is occupies. So every part of the body has all those 5. It's hard to diagnose through that. So you won't find in Ayurveda, that's the difference between Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, the diagnostics is not by elements.
Yeah, Chinese medicine breaks it down like that too. When you get deeper into the 5 elements, there's 5 elements within the 5 elements within the 5 elements.
Correct.
Yin in the yang,
Correct.
yang in the yin, and it keeps going.
Going on.
But it's difficult
So what
for
they
diagnosis.
said is, in order for Ayurveda to actually be able to diagnose, they kind of put root patterns, which we call Vata, Pitta, Kapha. They're called doshas.
Can you describe the doshas for our listeners? Just give us a high-level overview of the doshas.
Sure.
Vata, Pitta, Kapha.
Dosh means fault.
Fault. Like.
If someone to come and steal something from my house,
Okay.
he will be taken to the court and the charges of theft will be applied to him. He will be charged.
Okay.
So he will be taken to the court and the charges of theft will be applied to him. He will be charged.
Okay.
So the charges are called doshas in Hindi. If you go to same thing happens in India, the person will be taken to the court and these are the doshas that he's being applied with these faults.
Okay.
And he's the faulty person, and it's called doshi, or we call here the person who's being charged with.
Okay.
Dosh means something that is fault. It is inappropriate. It should not have happened, but has happened, and it's going to unharmonize the forces that make us. So Vata, Pitta, Kapha are doshas, fault, but patterns. They're not things. Most people get confused that the Vata, Pitta, Kapha are real things. They think in terms of weather. Is spring really real? We're going through summer. We're passing through summer. Is summer really real? Can you put a summer in the water bottle and ship it to China from here? Really real? Can you put a summer in the water bottle and ship it to China from here? No. But the forces behind it, the humidity, which is basically water, fire, the heat from the earth, sun, where the earth is with respect to the sun, which is a relationship between the two big gigantical bodies, and the wind. All of those, when a certain range, it creates a certain environment, we call it summer. Even the summer in San Diego this year is very different from last year. Same summer today, here now, is very different from summer in Bahrain right now, or in India, or in Malaysia. So even though it's summer everywhere in the planet, at least the northern hemisphere, but it's very different. In the same way, when in Ayurveda says you are a pitta dosha, doesn't mean that 2 pitta are same.
Right.
It's a pattern that is identified by interaction of forces. Pattern means it's a human conception. The sages created and identified 3 patterns are the root patterns, and they combine with each other too. So for example, if a vata pattern is suddenly starting, but it's air and space, they will experience more cold than usual, their skin will get dry, they'll have constipation, they'll have a restless mind, they will experience anxiety and fear, they will get startled by small things. That's we said the vata pattern has now expressed itself, it's a fault pattern. If it's not appropriately balanced, then those will affect physical, mental capabilities.
So people identify themselves with one of the 3 doshas. Is that a correct sort of position? It sounds like they're more fluid and they change. Your expression of the kapha patterns or energetics is more more appropriate?
So people identify it's because we are born with certain amount of those 5 forces that make us with a certain degree. So everybody, like I said, every place has a different summer across time and space. So the forces are real. When the forces make us, we have a certain constitution. We call that innate nature. When the forces make us, we have a certain constitution. We call that innate nature. If we stay in that innate nature, our life goes through the longevity as it is designed, or as it we're supposed to live, or as we fully live it, or we have capability to experience what we're supposed to experience or we want to experience. But if we go out of that innate constitution, which means I'm going out of my forces that are in ratio of certain degree. Pattern is nothing but forces in a certain ratio. And that's what we call weather pattern. Same thing inside us. Vata is a pattern. If somebody who is a Vata constitution innately will have a tendency to have a dry skin, will have a tendency to get constipated, will have tendency to racing mind. Mind is restless. Will have tendency to be able to start 10 different things and feel happy about it. These are the people who really want to start things but may not finish any of them. But they're not really affected by it that I didn't finish those. They will love to keep creative things. So they have that tendency to experience that, which has that innate constitution. So in English, the problem, because when you translate Sanskrit, which is based on process ontology, to English, which is subject-object and thing ontology, you start using articles like is.
Right.
And is kind of equates things. Apple is green, so we're kind of equating. But it's really not that greenness and apple are two same logical values.
Right.
But that's how English is. So when people start reading English and when they talk about English, that you are a Vata person, they start thinking that I am really something called Vata. But it's a pattern that somebody has conceptualized in identifying the pattern of imbalance or possibility of imbalance. Pitta, on the other hand, is primarily fire. But if you think, it's probably more like a damp heat. It has the damp as well and heat as well, but the heat is more than damp. And that, if it increases, you get heat issues. You get heat. It has the damp as well and heat as well, but the heat is more than damp. And that, if it increases, you get heat issues. You get anger. You get too much irritation. You get ulcers. You get heat in the blood. You get rashes. You get clammy skins with fall order. So those are pitta. Kapha, on the other hand, is primarily damp, cold. So it's heavy. Cold, when it's damp, becomes heavy. So then these people get congestions, they get heaviness, they get obsessive, they get greedy. So all of those are we call patterns of kapha that are imbalanced. And then we figure out what is this person's innate constitution and how do we bring it then to that same constitution. That's primarily of what the basis of Ayurveda is. In Kayakalpa, we go slightly further. We look, everybody as we go through life accumulates some kind of imbalance. Life is complicated. Doesn't matter where you, a toxin in the whole Ayurveda, ama. It means something that was supposed to be completely transformed into a different state, it didn't happen. I ate, for example, a heavy pizza, which I'm not supposed to, for example, because my digestion is weak, for example. But I enjoyed it. I was having party with people, I enjoyed it. But it did not fully digest through me. Now, there are things that should have gone out of my body, hasn't gone out. And that becomes toxin. Same thing with emotions. I was having argument with my parents. I should have told something I don't want it, but I couldn't. And now I'm doing it, which I don't want to do it. That whole thing becomes now undigested thought process, which becomes toxin. So it doesn't matter what is it, whether it's a physical, insubstantial. If it's not fully transformed, it gets suppressed inside our being. That becomes toxin. In Kayakalpa, we look which ones where they are. And the substantial, if it's not fully transformed, it gets suppressed inside our being. That becomes toxin. In Kayakalpa, we look which ones where they are. And then we work with the person to actually kind of in a more faster way move them out. But Ayurveda does that normally. So if you go to another practitioner, he's going to look for the exactly same or she's going to look for exactly same, but in much more easier way for your life as you're living through rather than taking you out of the life, then actually doing all these things and putting you back.
So take us through a Kayakalpa experience for somebody, and what would some of the things that people come for? Like, why would I come and say, Prana, help me, with some Kayakalpa?
Most often, historically there are two major reasons. One is like that mythical story about somebody who had to go back into a state for whatever reason, that they feel opportunity to live the life, but they require more energy and inner strength and emotional awareness of able to do that.
Okay.
In modern times, it's more chronic diseases.
Okay. So how frequent is Kayakalpa used, for example, in India, where it was originated?
In India, most often the Kayakalpa is used if you have money,
Okay.
if you have a practitioner,
Uh-huh.
if you have enough social status to be able to get out of the place and let it run your whole family like that. So it's not something like everybody uses every day. What happens is, for chronic diseases, practitioners have opportunity. So they will incorporate a little bit of it. So, and somebody who has a chronic, say somebody who has diabetes type 2, for example, they've reached to a place where they have now organs starting to be affected. They're starting to have night blindness, or their retina is not staying. So now they know that there is an opportunity for this person to be able to transform themselves, and if they're willing, then they'll tell them, okay, come live with me for a month. I'll go through the process. They won't tell them Kayakalpa and such, but they'll apply the same processes, which is primarily based upon what we call panchakarma.
Panchakarma,
which is 5 actions. Some of them are in Chinese medicine as well, but some of them are actually dropped out because modern life doesn't help. But it's basically emesis, purgation, enemas. Those are the 3 main.
Okay.
Where in other words, you focused on organs, each organ, specifically the organ that is highly toxic. In diabetes case, it's mostly digestive systems, pancreas and stomach, and then it's now affected the blood, which is now affecting the other organs. So you have to think in terms of where the person stage is. How do you slowly get the toxins out, at the same time not affect their life and health, so that they will actually make sure that you eat the food you're meant to eat. They'll sometimes mix herbs in the food. They'll do through the manual therapies first. They will give you regimens for sitting in meditation, inner work, figuring out what's going on with your emotions, working with it. So it's all of those happens together. But it happens in a duration that person has agreed, 30 days, 14 days, like that, and they'll create that regimen. So the herbs are used, manual therapies are used, emotional therapies, counseling, meditation, yoga, all of it is used.
Yeah, when we were talking about, this interview, I wasn't even aware of Kayakalpa as a part
Practice,
of Ayurveda.
yeah.
So how often is it used here?
In Western world, I think the first time a practitioner came from India and established an Kayakalpa institute, institute, it was in 1979.
79.
Yeah,
And where was that?
Northern California.
In Northern California, like Esalen?
No, LA, and now he's in Glen Ellen, Dr. Pandey. He's old now.
Okay.
But he was the first one, I think, as far as I know, who actually had a lineage from some Siddha teacher that he studied, and then he brought it here.
So is it fair?
But now it's fairly available in many places, because now India is getting much more money and much more people are becoming aware that what's the industrial food and living and stressful living is doing to their lives, and how the diabetes is climbing up and how the emotional issues are climbing up. So now in India, there are more people coming out. But when India went through suppression of colonization, all of these arts kind of went away. A lot went to Tibet. So if you go to Tibetan medicine, all of these arts kind of went away. A lot went to Tibet. So if you go to Tibetan medicine, you will hear precious pills. You will hear retreats, health retreats, where you will go live in a certain way, which is more towards Buddhist way of thinking, but it's still Kayakalpa, where you will hear yogis living in a way that their life was focused on longevity, but for inner work. So for that same peak experience. So in Tibet, it's more. So when Tibetans came to, after Chinese Revolution, when Tibetans came to India, They actually brought a lot of it. So if you go to Dharamshala, you will find precious pills and you will find regimens. They'll describe, okay, you have to go take a retreat, live this way, and then take these pills and take these external therapies and internal therapies. But those are all coming from Rasayana and Kayakalpa.
Does it follow a particular religious practice, or like is it Hindi, or is it Buddhist,
No.
or is it combination, or neither? Or,
No, so
or is it combination, or neither? Or?
No, so Ayurveda itself, as I said, originated from those people who came around to say that, okay, we're not going to live fully. We need to help people so they live fully, so they can experience what their inner experience, peak experience looks like. So it has nothing to do with the religion. It is based on the same outlook or a worldview we call the dharmic worldview, where the world is based on process ontology, that things are not substantial, everything is insubstantial. But it has nothing to do with the religion. Ayurveda does not have any. So let me step back. How does Ayurveda define us? Most people think it's body, mind, and spirit. That's how Ayurveda defines, but it's not fully correct. The root text of Ayurveda says, Sharira, Indri, Sattva, Atma, Dhari, Jiva. It means Sharira, body, Indri, subtle body or sensual body, Sattva, mind. And he actually, Charak, it is coming from Charak, he actually clarifies further that people may get confused. He says the only difference between innate and animate, not human, any animate, so plants, ant, microbes, human being, and innate, which means table, chairs, rocks. The only difference between these two is senses. That's it. So all body, mind, and spirit, if you think, everything has it. Rock has it too, according to Ayurveda. But the only difference between rock and us is that we have senses, we can experience, we can enhance our experience. Rock cannot. Plant has senses, it senses water, it senses weather pattern changes, it flourishes, it goes through its experience. So the only difference between innate and inanimate is senses. And Kayakalpa's primarily focus is the gateways through senses, which we call subtle body.
So when someone goes through...
Kayakalpa's primarily focus is the gateways through senses, which we call subtle body.
So when someone goes through the retreat, the Kayakalpa process, say, whatever it is, for me it would be a week or 14 days or 30, depending on how we're working together. How often would they do that, in their lifespan? Or, I mean, I guess it would depend on what they're going through, and they would seek you out for primers.
So initially, when somebody comes for, say, I want to go through Kayakalpa, most practitioners today, because knowing they're coming from urban, unless they're like yogis and all, that's different altogether.
Right.
But they know they're coming through urban life, they won't be able to sit for an hour still.
Right.
They won't have that capability and strength to be able to live on a food which is very simple, or have their mind completely inside. So they will tell them go through first a week of Panchakarma or even 3 days of Panchakarma.
Okay.
And then they will go through slowly building their strength. And then reach to a level that, okay, they can realize that now they can take the big one. So Ayurveda never says that you should change your diet tomorrow. You should never do anything suddenly.
Right.
Because it's a process.
Right.
Disease is a process, life is a process. You don't jerk it around. So you always go through where the person is, where their strengths are, how far they can take their changes, and then work with them. What is appropriate for this age, for this person's age, what they're coming from, what is their social background, family, all of it. So it's not a one factor saying, okay, now I'm going to change you. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So it's not like you go to Panchakarma or Kayakalpa for a month and then you go back to living your life exactly as you were before you did the Kayakalpa, and then go for another month of Kayakalpa and go back and live exactly the same way.
That will
you
be jerking around.
Yeah.
Once you change, it's very hard to go back.
Right.
So they will work with you in a way that you are ready to.
For another month of Kayakalpa and go back and live exactly the same way.
That will be jerking around.
Yeah.
Once you change, it's very hard to go back.
Right.
So they will work with you in a way that you are ready to change. It's not that in other words, it's not a substance base. You're not enhancing substance in yourself, that now that substance is depleted, you go back and again enhance the substance and then come back and deplete. That's not the way.
Yeah.
It's more of thinking. Our thinking about substance comes because we think we were not there before the body was formed in the womb. That substance comes around, egg and sperm, and creates the body, and then somewhere along that transition process from being 2 cells to a complete 50 trillion cells, and consciousness arises. That's how we think. But dharmic traditions have a totally different view.
There's no beginning, no end, right?
No, they say the physical body, which is called nirmanakaya, constructed body. So you actually created your own physical body with the intelligence that is already in your subtle body, and then came out from the womb. So it wasn't that somehow consciousness arose. So that means the intelligence through which you created your own body is still there in you. All the Ayurvedic practitioner has to do is give you the right amount of substances that you can recreate it and clean up the things that are stopping that process to happen. That's Ayurveda.
So how does the practitioner diagnose, if you will, the state of balance in an individual?
In a person. So you start with innate constitution, prakriti we call it. So in pulse. So there are, Ayurveda says there are 3 main body of diagnostics. Prashna, Sparshna, Darshana. Prashna is asking questions. We go through inquiry of everything. What is your job? What you do? How is your poop? How does you feel? All kind of questions. Do you feel cold? Do you feel dry? Prashna, Sparshna, Darshana. Prashna is asking questions. We go through inquiry of everything. What is your job? What you do? How is your poop? How does you feel? All kind of questions. Do you feel cold? Do you feel dry? You have ringing in ear? What is your appetite like? So we go through all these questions. This is the one full body. That's the one leg of diagnostics. Then it's Sparshna. We palpate. We palpate carotid pulse. We palpate radial pulse. Radial pulse gives us the constitution and also how it's different from where you are today from your constitution. We palpate channels. We palpate organs. We palpate the pulse in the cranium to relate all of this, what is happening inside the body. And then the third leg is observation. We look at your tongue. We look at your urine. We look at how your gait is. We look at how your tones are. We look at how your skin looks like. All of that. So all of these combined together then creates your state. That defines diagnostic. That's what you'll read in the text. That's what you learn in the school if you go to Ayurveda or with a teacher. But the tradition I come from, Siddha tradition, where the Kayakalpa is huge. Siddha tradition says that you cannot diagnose somebody fully unless you actually become them. So that suksham body, I said the subtle body, that we come into womb with that body and create ourselves, that subtle body or suksham body is still with us. That subtle body kind of goes into other person's subtle body. Then that information tells us what's going on to them. And it's no different than what we do in cranial cycle work. If you're actually doing cranial cycle work, my teacher used to say, you don't diagnose a person until you are in mid-tide, which is nothing mid-tide, which is nothing but mid-tide is a description of a body that's not physical, it's subtle. And they say, you don't touch a person until you're mid-tide, and you don't diagnose until you and client both are in mid-tide, which means you both are literally one. Then same thing in Ayurveda, thousands of years ago, saying you have to become them to be able to see what's going on with them. That's advanced, Siddha level. But in traditional, Prashna, Sparshna, and Darshana, observing, palpating, and asking questions.
There's so many parallels to Chinese medicine. As you're talking, I'm thinking about all the parallels of Chinese medicine. This would be in the Neijing, the role of the heart.
Yeah, Shen.
Yeah, then roll
you have
the
to
Shen.
quiet the Shen and feel the heart of a person. But you have to remember, Han Dynasty emperor invited Buddhism. So now there are texts proving that Han Dynasty 200 BC knew about 500 and showing that there were Buddhists. So to say that Buddhism came in 200 BC and didn't bring Ayurveda, it's like a blinders. So it's very entangled. Neijing is very entangled with so many things. Shanganun is if you look at Shanganun's 6 layers, they're very much physiology of Ayurveda. So it's very entangled. So I call it, there is so many things together.
So many parallels.
Sun Simya is called the king of medicinal. But Sun Simya himself writes about a person who he considers the physician king, Jivak, who was in 500 BC around the same time. He treated Buddha. He's considered as the king of physician. He traveled across all the way to Thailand. He's the Thailand's Wahukuru, which means the father medicine person. He actually created Thai medicine and the medicine bodywork of Thai. His statue is in oldest Thailand, Buddhist temple in Thailand, in Bangkok. So he was Jiwak, and he treated so many kings that he was considered as the king. Statue is in oldest Thailand, Buddhist temple in Thailand, in Bangkok. So he was Jiwak, and he treated so many kings that he was considered as the king of all physicians. Jiva, it means, remember I said life. Jivak means one who gives life. Some conspiracy theorists say that Han Dynasty invested Chibo, which doesn't exist anywhere else in the history of China, from the stories of Jivak. Jivak becomes Chibo. Because Chinese Jivak,
yeah. Interesting.
But it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, I don't know whether it's true or not. But if you look at history of China, it doesn't exist Chibo before that.
Yeah.
And the Jivak stories of Jivak went across all of South Asia, and he lived in Thailand for a long time. So he traveled from what is today Afghanistan, and finally ended up in Thailand. And his stories were all over South Asia, and they were inspiring. So there is a lot of entanglement between Chinese. I'm not saying the Taoist medicine has into Ayurveda that they've incorporated. And like how today's premier says in China, if you want to practice anything in China, you have to culturalize to the Chinese state culture. So
modern Chinese medicine is completely different.
But the whole ruler saying that if you want to practice Buddhism, then in China, you have to culturalize to what state culture is.
Oh, that's, yeah.
So you think they didn't do that in 200 BC when Han Dynasty said, if you want to practice Ayurveda, it has to be Chinese culture Ayurveda? It's the same principle that goes along all the cultures. Arabs did the same thing. We call Arabic numerals, but they actually came from Hindus. Arabs call Hindi numerals, and we call Arabic numerals, but they came from one place. So there is all these entanglement. It's like saying that, okay, India has nuclear capability, but that has nothing to do with Einstein or Max Planck or...
Right.
It's impossible to say that.
Yeah.
So it's always entangled. The world is very entangled to say that this is my medicine, this is your medicine. The world is very entangled to say that this is my medicine, this is your medicine. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
To me, Ayurveda has so much influence from Chinese medicine. Ayurveda has influenced so many medicines across the world. So to say it's pure,
it just took a little longer. They didn't have the internet back then.
There you go.
They had the Silk Road.
They had Silk Road, yeah.
So I want to dive a little deeper into the actual therapies.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit more about what, you would give some diet, you would do some massage, you would do some meditation, you would do some yoga. Dive a little deeper for us.
So let's take a simple case, if that helps.
Sure.
Because that will be much easier rather than talking in abstract terms.
Let's look at a patient or something.
Yeah, let's take a simple case. I have a patient, without giving gender or age, who has gone through in life. Now, person is somewhere in 30s. They want to have a family. They realized, the MD said that if you really want to have family and live normal life, you have to first get off from antidepressants. Because it's not going to help you to live. They also realize the dose keeps going up and up and up. It's not helping them. So they took 6 months to get off from antidepressant. So they had that courage that I want to. So first thing was enthusiasm in that I want to live my life. I'm no longer wanted to be dependent on substance to live my life. I want to live my life naturally, is to be able to have a family that I can nurture. That's we call the first step of maturity in a person's life.
The awareness.
Ayurveda will say, okay, this person has taken the first step to take the responsibility of their health, to take the responsibility of living life. They have brought up that enthusiasm that I want to live my life fully. I'm not living anymore. So they took 6 months to get off. Then fully, I'm not living anymore. So they took 6 months to get off. Then they realized they have no hunger. The antidepressant for 20 years has almost resolved their satiation level and hunger to same. They don't feel hungry, and they're neither satisfied from what they eat. So they eat habitually. And to a place where now, because they're off antidepressant, anything startles them, anything makes them fear and anxious. So they went through multiple alternative therapies. They went through even Ayurvedic practitioner, MDs who practice Ayurveda, to chiropractors who practice Chinese medicine or Ayurveda. Nothing helped. To place where somehow they found me and then say, okay, I need help. And they had like a laundry list of supplements they were on. All kind of supplements, from Ayurvedic ashwagandha, which is considered adaptogen for androgenic hormones, to opposite estrogens. Androgenic hormones to opposite estrogens. So they were taking substances and supplements. They were kind of making them a pendulum swinging back and forth, and they were not feeling in their mind, in their body. But none of these people looked what Ayurveda says the first thing, that if they have no hunger, nothing will work. So they got the enthusiasm for life. You're supposed to take that enthusiasm as a practitioner, transform internally so they have a hunger now. And they can absorb food. Giving them supplement is not going to replace food.
Right.
So they're not absorbing food, you're just bumping supplements on the top. They're just going back and forth. So the first thing I said, and the good part was they already knew what Ayurveda was. They already knew that they have to go through a different process. And they showed me all of that. I said, you're not absorbing food. You're just taking supplements thinking that's food. It's not. It's called supplement. Supplements are supposed to trigger organs to do more. Organs to do more. Supplements don't replace food. But if your organ is not doing its function and it's not healthy enough, you trigger more, you stress more. So the tongue looked like, as if we call in Chinese medicine, completely yin and blood deficient, pale, geographic, missing half of the cord in the front, and red. So I said, first, slowly get off from all these supplements. Start taking herbs only after your food is digested. So I take them one by one, everything off. I gave them...
Took all the supplements away.
Take all the supplements. I gave them food that is easy to digest. So I pulled all the processed food out, starting to give them what we call khichdi. The recipes of khichdi are all over the place. It's basically rice and lentils cooked together with spices. Porridge. It's more like
Kanji.
Kanji.
Yeah.
By the way, kanji comes from South India originally. Then became what we know today. They were in the mind that they have to eat because they were feeling this, what traditionally is defined as a hypoglycemia, where you actually feel low blood sugar and you feel your hands and feet are going cold and sweaty and heart is racing, and you feel that you need to eat something.
Yeah.
I said, no, you're feeling that because you're taking 2 supplements that are making a pendulum. So if you take the supplements off, you start digesting food, that will go down. And it did. So they no longer had that heart racing, sweaty, clammy, but they don't have hunger. They were still eating habitually. So there is a very simple thing you can do, which I still do for people who come with like chemotherapy and chronic diseases. They have no hunger. There's something called black salt. It's a normal salt, but cooked with salt that comes from earth for a longer time in a sealed chamber, sometimes in bamboos, sometimes in this. It changes from being a sodium chloride to a very little sodium chloride but high level of sulfur now. So it smells like rotten eggs. And you can't cook with it. It's not supposed to be cooked for. It is used as a topical modifiers. So you take a pinch of, suppose you're going to eat around noon, usually around between, in Ayurveda we say between 10 to 2 is your main time that you should have somewhere in between that time a big lunch. So you pick a time between 10 to 2 according to your lifestyle and say, okay, you're supposed to eat lunch around say 12:31. And you're not getting hungry. You take a pinch of black salt with a fresh piece of a ginger, put it in your mouth, suck it, chew it. The juice of ginger freshness and the salt, black salt together, when it goes down the stomach, it's going to wake up the hunger. And you will feel hungry. So initially they said, yes, they feel the gurgling and all that, but they still don't feel hunger, which means the body is starting to actually create the hunger, but the subtle body and all that, but they still don't feel hunger, which means the body is starting to actually create the hunger, but the subtle body, the senses that we're talking about, is still not connected. So they don't experience the hunger that body is going through in their senses, because the antidepressant has suppressed so much senses that they no longer can sense what is going on inside the body.
So in Chinese medicine, I'm going to translate this. You've tonified the kidney and the spleen yang.
Mostly
correct?
yang and the spleen.
Yeah.
Because
kidney yang and spleen yang.
Yeah, and
salt.
Correct.
ginger,
And
spicy,
fresh,
acid,
correct.
warm, and salty.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So
yeah.
that wakes up the hunger. And then I said, eat khichdi at that time, which is very easy to digest. They started doing it. They're starting to build the strength.
Mm-hmm.
It took another 3 weeks. And while they're going through it, I treat them with body work. I treat them with essential oils. I treat them with acupuncture. And then I told them to start doing once at least what we call enema, which is colonics, to clear the colon. Once I saw they're absorbing khichdi, I gave them herbs to mildly detox the whole GI tract. It's called Triphala.
Go back to the essential oils. So would you use them topically, or how do you use, and what do you use in this case?
In this case, primarily to bring up all the trauma that was suppressed for which they took antidepressant.
And what fragrances? Or
So
what
you
aromas?
combine, these are all oils that will warm the heart,
Okay.
warm the kidney, warm the mind, to be able to bring up everything that was suppressed to now process through. Because all the toxins then have to be come up, process, and move out. We are doing same thing with GI tract. We're cleaning up everything is stuck so that the hunger can arise and body can absorb. You have to do same thing with senses, same thing with mind. Everything that is suppressing them from experience, you have to slowly bring up, give them strength to process it through. So they talked about all the trauma they went through.
Is it like sandalwood, or is it the woods?
Ylang ylang.
Oh, ylang ylang.
Ylang ylang, Himalayan spikenard.
So
Jatamansi.
more aromatic fragrance to open up the
So
heart.
Jatamansi goes into mind. It is very nutmeg, which is very trance-inducing. Brings ylang ylang is very calming, but at the same time it warms up the heart. It's considered as aphrodisiac because it warms the kidney and heart to bring that sensuality back. Jatamansi is considered as more spiritual. It wakes up the mind's clarity to be able to see things rather than get engaged with it. Nutmeg does the same thing. It warms but allows you to see it rather than getting run by here and there by your mind.
So those are so many different fragrances.
Yes.
Do you apply them separately, or do you apply them at particular points on the body?
Yeah, marma points on the body.
Marma point. So you'd put a drop on the
Back,
marma
most
points.
of it back.
Most of it on the back.
Back.
Together.
Combined with the carrier oils.
Okay.
Carrier oils that will again warm up. But they're all affecting this insubstantial body, senses. It wakes up. So we say the root of all senses is touch. The meaning has to touch you to transform you. The food has to really touch you inside to be able to have a taste. So touch is the root of all. So when you're touching, if you are present with calm, you're helping person to feel the touch of their breath inside, it starts to change everything. So they have to process through. It took them another 3 weeks to say that, okay, now I'm actually feeling hungry, but because they were doing salt and ginger every time, it also purged things. Because remember, salt and ginger are very purging. So I said, okay, you're starting feeling hunger and you're starting to purge things, you'll stop the salt. And then we'll go further. And then you slowly go from that to now, first time giving them herbs to help with their anxiety so they can go through the life. This was mostly they were at home. So it took them almost 6 weeks to stay home. And then to now, first time giving them herbs to help with their anxiety so they can go through the life. This was mostly they were at home. So it took them almost 6 weeks to stay home and then work very little. And then it will take another 2 weeks before they can realize what happened. So it takes slowly to build it. But in the end, you go through the same layers for like any disease: physical, subtle, mind, and then awareness. All 4 layers you have to touch. And you have to find which one is not working. If digestion is not working, no matter what you do after that, it's useless.
Yeah.
So you have to bring what we call in Chinese medicine stomach qi up.
Tonify the
If
earth first.
You have to bring the stomach level to be able to digest food. Because if you are not able to materialize yourself, you're not able to create the vessel that will experience. Which in Chinese medicine is the thing. But in this case, you actually nourish first. Food first, external therapies first. Once the body builds a little bit of strength, then you start giving herbs to further detox or further clear, but without depleting them. At no point you deplete them, because as you deplete, you're actually losing backwards.
So not much exercise, more sitting, more
The exercise mostly like the one that can walk.
walking.
We won't do cardio if they're very depleted.
Sure.
But if there is a kapha person, which means they're obese and they're heavy and their toxins are stuck in them,
Make
then
them
you
sweat.
will make them sweat. Then you'll go through putting them in steamers to warm up, have them a little bit of cardio, and then slowly build the strength to release. But it depends. on
Not
the
in
person.
this case, though.
Not in this case. This person didn't even have enough weight.
Yeah.
They didn't feel their body. They didn't feel their emotions. They didn't feel their hunger. They didn't feel their satisfaction of food. So it's a very different person. In this, it's still we call kapha, which is the damp, but it's insubstantial. It's blocking every senses. So the body and senses are not working with each other. Same with Kayakalpa. You will do exactly same depending upon where the person in that stage is. So you will go through assessment of their body, you'll go through assessment of their mind, senses, see what is suppressed, see what is accessed, see what is deficient, which organs. Always start with the digestive fire first. In Siddha tradition I come from, we say in body there are 52 fires, not one, not two, 52. If all the fires are humming perfect, you have no disease. But if any one of those fire gets irregular, too high, too low, it's going to result in some toxin. Either food will get burned or food will not get digested well. Either way, you're going to have toxins that now needs to be cleaned. So you look for the first heart fire, which is that person had these things. That's the heart fire, we say. If that person didn't have that, I would have started with that. So do you really want to do this? Are you into doing this? And why?
So that would be more counseling to get to the heart?
To understand their enthusiasm will be counseling, yes.
Okay.
And helping them to see that it is your responsibility to have that. Nobody can put that enthusiasm in you. No medicine can add to your heart saying, now you go live your life. That has to come from inside.
It's a base motivation.
It is the base motivation and intention, we say. If that is not there, you can't even increase stomach fire. You can give them high amount of young herbs or digestive fire, it will just go waste because they have no enthusiasm. They have no zest to live.
No joie de vivre.
So once that comes, then comes the digestive fire. Can they digest food?
Yeah.
If they can't digest food, they won't digest herbs. Then once you build a little bit of strength, working with emotions. Because if they have emotions, you give them herbs and food, justified. Can they digest food?
Yeah.
If they can't digest food, they won't digest herbs. Then once you build a little bit of strength, working with emotions. Because if they have emotions, you give them herbs and food, the emotions will interfere. So if somebody is very, very angry all the time and they have irritability, you give them really calming food, it is not going to digest well. So you have to give them some meditation, some way of saying that when you eat, please do not have an emotional state that is not conducive to food. So maybe you should start cooking things, feel food, have aromas, give them guidance to make quick foods in 20 minutes that are healthy. They can connect with the food, so they have emotional attachment to the food before they eat, so the irritation at least vanishes when they're eating, and then they come back later, that's fine. So you have to find a way to have the digestive fire come up, then herbs, but you can't separate things from emotions and their zest. The only thing out of this life, why you don't want to live, you have taken birth. You took all the effort to build this body in the womb, came out. What is now stopping you to go further in?
So there's no spiritual counseling in Ayurveda?
No.
Okay.
Because Ayurveda focuses on three aspects, body, senses, and mind. Not
Mind is not...
No, mind is not consciousness.
Okay.
Mind is the intelligence that you have that keeps things the way they are and moves things the way they should move. It gives you thought process, it gives you analysis, it gives you discernment, it brings all the senses information, transforms into the meaning. All of that is mind, but it's an instrument. It is no different than having a body. So we say body, senses, and mind are three layers that our awareness wears around. In Ayurveda, we call Purush as the one who is inside the body, who made the body, who is living through the body, inside the body, who made the body, who is living through the body, who is witnessing all the experiences. Prakriti is your body, your constitution, your way of thinking, your way of feeling, your attitudes, your perceptions, all of that is your nature, innate nature. Both are together. But the Purush is what is the innate sense of saying, okay, I want to have this experience. That awareness is what we call Purush. It's actually Pu and Rush. Pur means boundary. So if you go to India or even Bali, which is a lot of 7th century India, you will see names of the houses and cities with Pur or Pura, which means boundary. And city will have ending as Pura, Ramnath Pura, which means the Pura or the boundary of Ramnath, like that. Ish means Lord. So it's that Lord sitting in that boundary is you, is me. It's that sitting in that boundary is you, is me. It's that individual. Because we wanted to experience certain things in certain way. And that's why we are here. But Prakriti is what gives that manifestation of the things around you so you can experience it. Ayurveda is all about working with Prakriti. Your body, your senses, your mind. But what gave you that desire to experience who you are and what you want to experience is not Ayurveda. That spiritual part.
That's the spiritual part.
Exactly. Which kind of peak experience you're looking for, it's totally up to you. It has nothing to do with Ayurveda. Why you want to live is up to you. How you want to live, which kind of maturity you're looking for, which kind of experience you're looking for, it's your inner reflection. That's where all these Buddhists and Jain and Vedic, all these paths to dig up deeper of who you are. But the sages came together in conference saying, if they don't have enough vitality, if they don't have enough strength in their body, senses and mind, there is no way for them to, if they don't have enough strength in their body, senses and mind, there is no way for them to reflect back and say, why I'm here.
Why am I existing? Yeah.
So that's why Ayurveda was meant for, to create that foundation so that you can go on, do what you're meant to do. But Ayurveda's role is not to tell you what to do. It's nothing to do with spirituality. It's based on dharmic religion, saying that you have to have foundation to have an spiritual experience. But Ayurveda has nothing to do with spirituality, which is where people get confused.
I think they do get confused. That's a good distinction. Let's talk about some of the herbs. You mentioned ashwagandha.
Yeah.
Ashwagandha is, I would venture to say, the most popular herb and
Over-popular, I would say.
Yeah, huh?
Over-popular
herb, Ayurvedic herb.
So in
Western culture, anyway.
Yeah, in Ayurveda and in Kayakalpa, rarely you will give single herb.
Okay.
Very rarely. Even for salt, I had ginger added to it. Even for cooking, it's like you will never cook with one variety, diversity, and they all come in complex combinations. We love that. As a human, even animals love that. The complex environment, nurturing environment, subtleties of tones and everything in music. You won't have one rag or one rhythm note and say, okay, that's music. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
So same with us. So there is no prescription usually in Ayurveda, even in culinary work, that you will use only one herb or one spice and you're done with it. It doesn't work. So that's why I think people get confused when they take Ayurveda's herbs and then they think about curcumin from turmeric and that's Ayurveda. It's not.
Right.
Taking curcumin is not Ayurveda. It is not even in Ayurveda. In real turmeric, it's only 3%. But what is 97%? You discard, which Ayurveda will never do it. So, yes, ashwagandha is one of the herbs, but not the only herb. There are many herbs. Guduchi is another one, which is really good. If you ever see Tibetan Buddhism, they have medicine Buddha.
Yeah.
He's sitting with a vessel in his hand, the pot. In the pot on the top, there is actually an herb. It's called haritaki. It's very sacred herb in Tibetan medicine. Imagine your medicine Buddha is sitting with it.
Yeah.
And it's very, very healthy. And so if you heard me talking about Trifla, it is made up of 3 main herbs, out of which is one is Amlaki, Bibitaki, and Haritaki. The Haritaki is the same one I'm talking about. Most of the Siddha tradition says as you start to age, some aspect of those 3 have to be there in your life to be able to clean things that your digestive fire is starting to weaken. So as we pass through the ages, initially we have a lot of phlegm. The baby is supposed to be fluidy.
Yeah, they're damp.
And then they become heat, which is where the puberty starts, and then the heat comes up, so pitta comes up. So you go from kapha to pitta, and then you go vata. That's why which is where the puberty starts, and then the heat comes up, so pitta comes up. So you go from kapha to pitta, And then you go Vata. That's why all geriatrics have usually dry skin, constipation, racing mind, tremors. All of those are Vata. Internal wind increases. So you go through transition. As you go through transition, certain formulas help depending upon your innate constitution to support it. So Haritaki is another one. Amlaki, which is the Indian gooseberry, the highest amount of vitamin C on any fruit that can have. Then is Shatavari, which really translates to wife of 100 husbands. So it's very women, or equivalent of ashwagandha, but for on women's side. And there is also, like already talked about, spikenard. It's used in Ayurvedics as well for mind-related things with jatamansi. It really means hair of an old mother, jatamansi, which is Himalayan spikenard or Indian spikenard. So there are many herbs. I can go on for herbs, but we won't finish. But if you're looking for herbs and recipes, my Instagram, if you search with a tag for food as medicine, you will see recipes and you will see herbs that I talk about that are very much in life for Kayakalpa or rejuvenation and things like that.
So food as medicine?
Food as medicine.
That's your Instagram page.
That's my tag for the post. My Instagram page is Dr. Prana, Dr. Pranaji, Dr.Pranaji.
Okay, Dr. Pranaji. Well, we've covered a long road from history and the classic texts of Ayurveda to some modern herbs and some applications. I really appreciate having you here. Please check out Prana's website and his information for more information. And Prana, thank you so much for your depth of knowledge and being here.